Welcome to the debate. Usually, when we talk about building infrastructure, let's say a massive multi-lane toll road, there is this assumption that whoever pours the most concrete, whoever builds the wider lanes automatically wins the traffic. It feels physical. It feels, undeniable.
Yeah, I come at it from a different way when thinking about infrastructure, but I do see your premise. The sheer scale is supposed to be like the ultimate competitive moat. You look at the size of the project and assume it's just simply too big to fail.
Right. But then you look at the artificial intelligence landscape as we sit here in May 2026. Suddenly, that massive toll road is starting to look awfully empty.
Well, the traffic is being rerouted.
Exactly. Why? Because someone else built a navigation system that tells the drivers exactly where to go, completely bypassing the toll booths entirely.
Which presents the ultimate infrastructure paradox, right? You can own the roads, but if you don't control the map, you really don't control the journey.
And that brings us directly to the kickoff of Google I/O 2026. If we rewind 12 months to March 2025, the launch of Gemini 2.5 Pro had analysts treating the foundation model race as a genuinely tight three-way contest.
It really did feel that way.
But today, that picture has radically shifted. Google has slid into a clear third place behind OpenAI and Anthropic. So the central disagreement we are exploring today is about the true battlefield for AI dominance. I argue that Google's survival depends entirely and urgently on winning over professional software developers. Enterprise trust and API lock-in are calcifying into permanent market advantages. If Google does not win the developer, they lose the future of the web.
And I argue that this framework fundamentally over-indexes on early-stage developer sentiment while ignoring Google's unparalleled structural reality. Their consumer distribution network, specifically custom silicon and an installed base of 3.9 billion Android devices, serves as an insurmountable distribution moat. That scale will eventually override early developer preferences. In consumer technology, distribution isn't just an advantage, it is the entire game.
Well, let me lay out exactly why the foundation model race is no longer about research prestige or, massive consumer scale. It is entirely dictated by developer adoption and coding performance.
Okay, let's hear it.
In AI infrastructure, position compounds. When a software developer chooses OpenAI's GPT-4o or Anthropic's Claude for their coding workflows, they aren't just making a casual, easily reversible choice. They are writing highly specific integrations.
Let me stop you there because I think we need to unpack what a highly specific integration actually means in practice. For the average listener, it might sound like swapping out a brand of light bulb. You unscrew one API, you screw in another.
Oh, it is absolutely not like swapping a light bulb. It's more like rewiring the entire electrical grid of an office building. When developers build an enterprise AI application today, they are calibrating what we call retrieval augmented generation pipelines, or RAG pipelines.
Right, which is basically the system that lets an AI read a company's private proprietary data securely.
Yes. And developers have to tune those pipelines to the unique tokenization quirks of a specific model. Tokenization is basically how an AI chops up text into numbers it can understand.
And they all do it differently, right?
Exactly. OpenAI chops up words differently than Google's Gemini does. So if an enterprise spends 6 months organizing millions of internal documents to perfectly match how Claude reads text, and they build complex error handling around Anthropic-specific server limits,
that builds institutional muscle memory.
yes, it does not migrate easily. Enterprise procurement, the actual buying decisions made by the C-suite, strictly follows these developer preferences. They aren't going to tell their engineering team to scrap a year of work just because a new Google model scored 2 points higher on a benchmark.
I hear the urgency there, but I just don't buy that early lock-in dictates the end state of this market. Let me tell you why. I certainly acknowledge the slip in developer benchmarks. I mean, Google's tools have underperformed in coding evaluations for months, and that is a real deficit.
A massive deficit.
Sure, but this entire developer-first framework fundamentally ignores Google's unique, unparalleled assets. Let's look at the actual architecture of the internet. Google owns tensor processing units, or TPUs. They process hundreds of billions of search queries.
Okay, but...
And they have 800 million videos on YouTube acting as the world's largest labeled multimodal data set.
But how does having a bunch of YouTube videos stop a developer from choosing Anthropic to build their company's internal tools?
Because you are focusing entirely on internal enterprise tools, while the ultimate prize is consumer behavior. Contrast ChatGPT's 600 million weekly users with Android's 3.9 billion active devices.
That is a big gap, I'll admit.
It's a massive gap. If you are listening to us right now on a Pixel or a Samsung, you are part of Google's insurmountable moat. When Google embeds AI natively into the operating system, users don't go to an app store and choose a product.
They just use what's there.
Exactly. They don't evaluate a developer benchmark leaderboard. They just open their phones. That frictionless consumer distribution is a far stronger, more permanent force than early developer evaluations.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the consumer behavior of the past decade will remain static. Let's go back to that toll road analogy.
Sure.
Google's $175 billion search engine is a toll road built on one highly specific behavioral assumption that people will type queries into a Google-owned box, look at a page of links, and view the advertisements sandwiched between them. That is the only way the toll road makes money.
Right.
But if developers are building AI-native alternatives using OpenAI or Anthropic infrastructure, they bypass the toll road entirely. They answer the user's question directly and end the session right there.
But that assumes those startups can scale that behavior to the global population before Google simply integrates the exact same direct answer capability natively into the phone you're already holding.
They are scaling it right now. And we have to remember the 2024 federal monopoly ruling against Google search. That legal vulnerability is landing at the exact moment when AI competitors are offering the first technically credible alternative to Google search in history.
That's a fair point on the timing.
Right? If developers, the people actually building the applications, are constructing the tools that systematically dismantle your core revenue engine, how can consumer distribution save you? Those 3.9 billion Android users are slowly but surely being rerouted by enterprise-backed AI platforms that live outside the Google ecosystem.
I'm sorry, but this is where the narrative outpaces the reality. Startups, no matter how much enterprise developer love they have, lack the structural scale to replace the open web's discovery layer permanently.
Even with the rapid adoption we're seeing?
Even then, you mentioned OpenAI and Anthropic. Let's look at their structural reality. OpenAI has no hardware partnership. They have no default browser placement. They have no operating system.
True.
And Anthropic has even less. They are entirely dependent on user intent initiating from a cold start, meaning someone has to actively remember they exist, pick up their device, open a specific app, or navigate to a specific URL.
I'll give you that the cold start is real, but that friction is decreasing every day. People are setting these tools as their homepage. They are downloading the desktop apps. The friction is vanishing because the utility is so high.
Decreasing friction is not the same as zero friction. Google's search index generates a real-world intent feedback loop that startups simply cannot buy. Think about it.
Okay.
When someone types a query into Google, it's often high-friction, immediate need economic intent. I need an emergency plumber right now. How do I fix a broken water heater?
Localized intent.
Yes, that specific, panic-driven, local data trains models completely differently than someone having a philosophical debate with a conversational chatbot. Furthermore, when AI is baked directly into the Android keyboard, into Google Maps, into the default camera app, the user intent is captured before the user even realizes they need an AI. You cannot disrupt a $175 billion business solely with developer tools if you don't control the endpoint where the consumer actually lives.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what actually matters, especially as we look at the expectations for Google I/O 2026. You are talking about consumer endpoints.
Heavily, yes.
But Google I/O is a developer conference first and a product showcase second. The audience that dictates the future of this company isn't the consumer watching the live stream. It's the enterprise architects deciding which platform to commit to for the next 3 to 5 years.
I agree that enterprise trust is critical.
And history matters here. Google has a documented pattern of unveiling breathtaking consumer demos that either ship months late or quietly disappear.
Are you referring to things like Duplex back in 2018?
Exactly that. Duplex wowed audiences.
It was an AI making a phone call to a hair salon sounding completely human, but it took years to reach meaningful scale.
That's true. The rollout was incredibly slow.
Look at Project Astra more recently. It remains more concept than a ubiquitous product. Bard was rushed out the door. This keynote theater has bred deep cynicism among the exact demographic Google needs to win back.
The developers.
Yes. If Google wants to survive this shift, the metrics of success at I/O cannot be flashy consumer integrations. They must be verifiable developer adoption numbers.
But why is an enterprise architect going to care about adoption numbers over the raw capabilities of the model itself?
Because enterprise architects are managing risk, they need to see a surge in active projects on Vertex AI, which is Google's enterprise machine learning platform. They need to see Google reclaiming the top spot on the SWE bench for coding.
Just for clarity, the SWE bench is the industry standard test evaluating how well an AI can autonomously solve real-world software engineering issues, right?
Yes, it tests if the AI can actually act like a junior developer, rather than just a glorified autocomplete. But it's not just benchmarks. To win enterprise trust, Google needs concrete wins in the unglamorous stuff: API pricing, context window reliability, and latency at scale.
I want to push back on the latency point. Why is a split-second difference in latency a structural crisis?
Because of how these models are being used in the real world. If a consumer is asking a chatbot for a recipe, they will happily wait 3 or 4 seconds for the text to start streaming.
Right. Consumers are fairly patient with that.
But in the enterprise space, AI is being deployed as automated agents, handling thousands of sequential tasks behind the scenes. If you are a massive retail company and your AI is processing 10,000 customer service emails a minute.
Reading the email, checking inventory.
Exactly, issuing a refund and drafting a reply. A 3-second latency delay on every single API call compounds. It crashes the system. It creates a massive backlog. If Google's latency is worse than Anthropic's, the enterprise buyer will walk away. Period.
That is a stark picture.
It's reality. Without these fundamental developer tools and rock-solid reliability, the massive consumer distribution pipeline you're talking about is practically useless because no one is building the next generation of software to feed into it.
That is a compelling argument, and I absolutely agree that keynote theater is a massive risk. I am not defending vaporware or flashy stage demos that never ship. But I would frame the true test of I/O 2026 entirely differently.
Okay, how so?
It's not just about winning the SW bench for coding or proving latency at scale. Those are symptoms of a larger issue. The root cause and the real test is organizational discipline.
Meaning what? Exactly. Their corporate structure?
Meaning their ability to get out of their own way. Think about the intellectual lineage here. The 2017 Attention is All You Need paper, the literal blueprint for the transformer architecture that OpenAI, Anthropic, and every single major LLM uses today, came from Google Brain.
That's undeniable.
AlphaFold, which is arguably one of the most profound scientific breakthroughs in computational biology in a century, came from DeepMind. The sheer talent, the massive infrastructure, the theoretical capability. Well, wait, let me rephrase that. The theoretical capability, it undeniably exists within Google.
It exists, sure.
The real issue to watch isn't whether they can appease developers with a faster API endpoint. It's whether Google can prove it has solved its internal coordination problem.
You are talking about the silo problem, the fact that Google operates as a dozen different fiefdoms.
Exactly. How does the gap between a massive breakthrough in a DeepMind lab and a failing consumer product actually happen? It happens because of silos. A researcher builds a brilliant, world-changing model, but to get that model deployed onto the search homepage, it has to run a gauntlet.
The bureaucracy.
Right. It needs sign-off from the legal team, the trust and safety team, the ads monetization team, the search quality team. Google has spent years managing AI development around concerns over reputational risk and regulatory exposure, demanding internal consensus.
While OpenAI operated with a single-minded focus on shipping product.
Right. The gap between theoretical genius and a feature that works reliably for 2 billion users requires cross-team coordination that no amount of pure research talent automatically supplies.
So you're looking for proof of cohesion.
Yes. My metric for success I/O isn't API call volume. It's whether I/O 2026 demonstrates that Google can finally ship these breakthroughs as unified, coherent features natively across Search and Android. If they can prove that the silos are broken, the developer deficit becomes a secondary solvable issue.
I have to strongly challenge the idea that the developer deficit is merely a secondary, solvable issue. That drastically underestimates how developers operate in the real world. Right now, developers evaluate Google's tools as feeling cobbled together.
Because of the silos.
Right. They look at Google's documentation and it feels like 3 different teams wrote it, which, as you just pointed out, is probably exactly what happened. Contrast that with the elegant, unified developer experience offered by Anthropic or OpenAI. When an enterprise architect is making a build versus buy decision today, they aren't looking at Google's theoretical capacity to unify Android and search in the future.
No, they're looking at what works right now.
They are looking at the documentation in front of them right now.
I understand they are looking at the present, but they are also making a massive financial bet on the future.
And when they choose a rival, any locked Google out of the next 3 to 5 years of enterprise architecture. Do you realize what that means? It means the internal data of Fortune 500 companies, the massive proprietary real-world data sets that will drive the next wave of AI utility are being piped into competing ecosystems.
A data flywheel.
Exactly. If JP Morgan Chase or Walmart builds their entire internal AI infrastructure on OpenAI, all that feedback data, all that edge case learning benefits OpenAI's models. You can't just fix your internal silos, flip a switch in 2 years, and expect to win those enterprises back.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the underlying economic physics of the cloud and AI landscape? You are talking about lock-in, but let's talk about the reality of lock-in versus the reality of long-term capital.
I'm listening. How does capital break developer lock-in?
You're assuming that the current state of play where OpenAI and Anthropic have an edge in developer tooling and documentation will remain static long enough for that lock-in to be fatal. But you have to look at the hardware layer. Google operates its own custom silicon. We talked about tensor processing units earlier.
The TPUs, right?
What does a TPU actually do? It is custom hardware designed specifically for the matrix math required by AI, and Google has been refining them for a decade. Those TPUs give Google a profound cost and speed leverage that OpenAI and Anthropic simply cannot match over a 5-year timeline.
Because OpenAI and Anthropic don't own their own hardware, they are entirely dependent on third-party cloud providers.
Precisely the opposite of vertical integration. OpenAI pays a margin to Microsoft to use Azure. Anthropic pays a margin to Amazon to use AWS. They are paying the cloud tax. Google is the hardware, they are the cloud provider, and they are the model builder. They own the entire stack.
So they don't pay the tax.
Exactly. This means they can amortize the astronomical costs of training and inference across their massive existing search and YouTube revenue streams. Over a 5-year horizon, raw compute costs will dictate enterprise survival.
So your argument is that Google will simply starve them out?
My argument is that as AI models become heavily commoditized, when GPT-6 and Gemini 4 are virtually indistinguishable in baseline intelligence, the provider who can offer the cheapest, fastest, and most seamlessly integrated inference at scale will win. Economics will ultimately override early developer loyalty.
Even with the switching costs?
Yes, an enterprise architect might love Anthropic's documentation today, but if Google's vertical integration with TPUs allows them to run large-scale automated workflows at half the computational cost in 2028, those enterprises will migrate. Economics forces the migration. The board of directors will demand it. That structural cost advantage gives Google the runway they need to fix their tooling deficit.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it drastically oversimplifies what it takes to migrate an enterprise system. Economics alone do not break developer lock-in that easily. Migrating a massive enterprise system from one foundation model to another isn't just about comparing API costs on a spreadsheet.
Of course it's complicated, but millions of dollars in savings is a powerful motivator.
It is, but look at the hidden costs. You have to pass entirely new security audits. You have to ensure compliance with data privacy laws for a whole new vendor. You have to retrain your engineering staff. You have to rewrite incredibly complex prompt logic. Because as we established earlier, a prompt that works beautifully on Claude might hallucinate wildly on Gemini.
The behavior is different, yes.
The human capital cost of switching often completely negates the computational cost savings. If Google allows its competitors to define the fundamental architecture of AI applications right now, they are surrendering the standard. It's like letting someone else define the TCP/IP protocol of the AI era, and then hoping you can win the market by offering cheaper routers 5 years later. You can't. The standard is already set.
That TCP/IP analogy is brilliant, but it assumes we are talking about a startup trying to offer cheaper routers. We aren't. We're talking about an entity that already controls the endpoint devices for half the planet. Let's look at the multimodal capabilities for a second.
Okay.
You mentioned developers building the next generation of AI applications. When a developer wants to build a truly next-generation multimodal agent, say an AI that understands video, audio, and text simultaneously in real time, what dataset is actually training that underlying model?
They are scraping whatever they can get their hands on.
Exactly, and they are hitting a wall. Competitors are scraping the public web, hitting severe licensing walls with publishers, and quite literally running out of high-quality human-generated textual data. Now look at Google. They have 800 million YouTube videos.
The proprietary data.
It is a proprietary, constantly updating, real-world data stream of humans fixing cars, cooking meals, playing instruments, and explaining software. Google's data flywheel is entirely insulated from the supply shocks that are going to hit Anthropic and OpenAI.
Which brings us right back to the core tension we've been circling. Having the data, having the custom silicon, having the billions of users, it is all just latent potential if the people who actually build the connective tissue of the digital economy, the software developers, abandon the platform.
It's a massive risk.
To summarize my perspective on I/O 2026, the window for Google to act is measuring in months, not years. The AI race has shifted from a theoretical research exhibition to a ruthless, practical battle for structural integration. Reclaiming leadership requires verifiable enterprise trust and absolute dominance in developer coding tools today. Why? Because whoever builds the developer pipelines dictates how the entire web is reorganized. If AI-native competitors continue to absorb the query volume that used to go to Google Search, Google's massive distribution network will atrophy. You cannot be the gatekeeper of the open web if all the gates are being built by someone else.
And to summarize my position, while the developer deficit is real and the urgency at I/O is palpable, it does not spell the end of Google's dominance. We have to look past the flashy model updates and the immediate panic over coding benchmarks. Google's foundational assets, 3.9 billion Android devices in people's pockets, proprietary TPU silicon running at lower margins, and the DeepMind brain trust provide a massive structural safety net.
They are formidable assets.
Absolutely. OpenAI and Anthropic are brilliant, undoubtedly, but they are fighting a war of attrition on rented infrastructure with no endpoint control. The game of global technology dominance is ultimately won on scale, unit economics, and native consumer integration. Google has the capital and the distribution to absorb this early hit, fix its internal coordination silos, and win the marathon.
The stakes here really do extend well beyond Google's quarterly earnings or stock price. Google built the open web's discovery layer. Every publisher, every local restaurant, every media outlet has spent 2 decades building their operations on the assumption that Google's search infrastructure is permanent.
It essentially became the operating system of the internet's economy.
Precisely. And its current third-place status in the foundation model race introduces incredible fragility into that entire global ecosystem. If the gatekeeper gets sidelined by a new generation of AI developers, the ripple effects will be profound. Looking past the headline-grabbing announcements at I/O 2026 allows us to understand this deeper, underlying tension between the momentum of developer preference and the raw physical power of distribution scale.
It really comes down to whether Google can synthesize its brilliant, disparate parts into a single cohesive force before the developers build a world that doesn't need them.
So as the developers and enterprise architects digest the announcements coming out of Google I/O, the question remains, if someone else is building the navigation system, does it really matter how wide you pour the concrete on the toll road? We will see how these dynamics unfold in the months ahead.